The Hobbit is a book that needs no introduction, so I'm not going to bother. Welcome to From Page to Pixel. The video game probably needs some introducing though, so cast your mind back to 2003. Return of the King is being hyped up to come out in cinemas. Meanwhile, due to complications regarding licenses, a company called Sierra owns the rights to make video games for the Lord of the Rings books. EA had the rights to make video games for the Lord of the Rings movies. So it's a bit complicated, but they managed to sort things out. But obviously, in the year that Return of the King came out, we also have the Hobbit game. Now, with this bit here, saying the prelude to the Lord of the Rings, just the Lord of the Rings, it's kind of clear they were trying to capitalise on the hype for Return of the King. But, is it more than just a cash-in? The Hobbit begins with the narrator very briefly explaining the first chapter of the book, establishing Thorin's band of dwarves need a thief, and Gandalf has volunteered Bilbo to do it, Bilbo having barely any confidence in his ability to help. It's a nice little cutscene, but I'd have loved to have some gameplay for this part. In the book, Bilbo rushes around as he tries to feed all 12 of the dwarves, and this could have been used as a good little tutorial for the game, exploring Bilbo's big hobbit hole. No, that doesn't sound any better. Exploring Bilbo's home and getting to grips with the controls, perhaps having some easy platforming as Bilbo navigates the larder to retrieve cakes, and there could have been some combat as Bilbo tries to shoo away mice or something similar. The tutorial we get isn't anything to complain about though. It's a dream sequence in which Bilbo fights a load of goblins, which I know sounds cliche, but throughout the book Bilbo has dreams which serve as premonitions for what is about to happen in the plot. So this is a nice way of using that plot device within the game. Plus, Bilbo is fully powered up here, so we get an idea of all the techniques we'll use as we progress through the game. The combat in the game isn't exactly top notch, but I guess it's fine for what it is. Bilbo can attack with his trusty sword Sting, his walking stick, or throw rocks at his enemies. And you can lock onto enemies which allow you to defend yourself better by holding down on the left stick. Strangely, this is the only game mechanic that isn't explained to you, so I wonder if the developers just forgot to mention it. The combat does seem a lot more suited to the pressing of a mouse than using a controller, reminding me a bit of the combat in American McGee's Alice, but unfortunately getting the PC game to run on Windows 10 is a right mission, so I'm just emulating it. Bilbo wakes up the next day and is told by Gandalf that all the dwarves have gone ahead to the Green Pony Inn, and that we better catch them up. This second level serves as a tutorial for the platforming of the game, which takes up a lot more of the game's runtime than its combat sections. We get to have a look around Bilbo's home, but there's not much here and no way of having a look in the larders, sadly. Anyway, we go outside and we get to have a good explore of Hobbiton. Hobbiton isn't given that much attention in the book, it being described in a lot more detail in the later Lord of the Rings books, so it's nice that the developers are taking the time to flesh things out a bit here. The level is broken into main missions and side missions, the main missions being to get to the inn, while villagers around the town give various tasks to Bilbo, such as finding children playing hide and seek, or collecting food supplies for the long journey ahead. I guess the game's mission structure, and overall the game's structure as a 3D platformer, is kind of like Spyro, with there being a clear task to complete in each level, and NPCs having smaller tasks for you as well. Unfortunately, its controls aren't as precise as Spyro, but we'll get into that later. We can't just go straight to the inn because the bridge is closed, but Sandyman says he'll fix the bridge if we can bring him his hammer. Sandyman is a resident of Hobbiton who doesn't get a mention until Return of the King in the books, so again it's nice that the developers took the time to think about the source material and what characters could be here. This starts a nice little platforming section that exhibits most of what you'll be doing in the game. Bilbo using vines and ropes and later his walking stick to traverse the land and get things for people. I'll highlight this now and no doubt we'll be talking about it later. Way too much of this game is Bilbo going on fetch quests. I mean, really the plot of the book is essentially Bilbo being roped in by Gandalf to go on a massive fetch quest for Thorin, so I guess the developers stayed true to the source material, but still, this doesn't exactly make for great entertainment. Did Tolkien set the path for MMORPGs? Anyway, once Sandyman fixes the bridge, Bilbo can either go straight to the inn or do some more quests for the villagers. The only one that is important is the one where Bilbo has to open a chest, another core mechanic of the game. Bilbo is meant to be the burglar of his party, and so it makes sense that Bilbo would have to open chests for treasure. and as we get into the game more, there are chests with key items Bilbo has to get. The mechanic for opening them is a bunch of random mini games which all boil down to hitting X at the right time, and not hitting it when it's red because Bilbo will be poisoned. It's a quick time events. God, I'm having Golden Compass flashbacks. The third level just serves as a way of making sure the player is familiar with the controls and introduces the first character exclusive to the game, Bastila. Bastila is an elf who managed to get injured in a cave and needs Bilbo to get her a few ingredients to make her feel better. I was kinda tempted to leave it, but turns out if you don't help her you can't progress, because she has the Witch King's stone and we need that to get out of the cave. The Witch King isn't actually in this game, and isn't mentioned outside of this level, so it seems like the developers thrown in a cheeky bit of Lord of the Rings lore. Anyway, this level also serves to show how imprecise the controls are. I know this is a PS2 era game, and the controls were probably a lot better on PC thanks to the better camera control offered by a mouse than a stick at the time, but damn this is bad. The camera is like the camera in Sonic 06, you know, where it gets stuck on every piece of terrain as if there's an actual person controlling the camera and trying to move around the place. Meanwhile, jumping can be a bit of a shot in the dark, since you can never be sure whether Bilbo will go where you want him to, or whether he'll shoot off in the wrong direction and fall to his death. Thank God for save states, because otherwise I'd be spending way too much time on this game. I realise a lot of platform games were janky like this back in the day because developers were still getting to grips with 3D environments, but there are plenty of good examples of 3D platformers with precise controls, such as Spyro, Mario 64, and even licensed children's fare like Battle for Bikini Bottom, which came out the same year as this. So sorry, I'm not going to give this a pass for being a product of its time. The fourth level is Roast Mutton. A chapter of the same name in the book is where Bilbo first shows his worth as a burglar, and so I was interested to see how that was translated into gameplay. Just like in the book, it's the task of Bilbo to sneak around the trolls, and so the game introduces its final major mechanic, stealth. I've got to be honest, I'm not a big fan of stealth games because too many games end up butchering the mechanic, but I have to say, the stealth is done pretty well here, with it being easy to judge whether you'll be in the troll's line of sight. There's even a fun little bit where you have to sneak past a troll while he's yawning. The annoying thing is, if you mess up, the trolls catch Bilbo and you have to start again. If you don't mess up, the trolls still catch Bilbo. In the book, the trolls do indeed catch Bilbo, and then Bilbo does his best to confuse the trolls and turn them against each other. But sadly, in the game, this is just brushed off in a cutscene before we go to the next level. So really it shouldn't matter if the player fails. There's an argument to be made that it's more about when the player is caught, but again, in the book, when Bilbo is caught, he has to use his charisma to get out of things. So maybe there could have been a section in the game similar to this, with Mass Effect style conversation selection, and depending on where the player had messed up the stealth section, the longer the charisma section would be. What even is the next level? Overhill and Underhill. The game leaves out the chapter from the book A Short Rest, just explaining in a cutscene that Bilbo and co made it to Rivendell and followed Elrond's advice to head to the Misty Mountains. When we get into the level, there's this thunderstorm happening, and some giants throwing rocks. In the book, the giants are said to be throwing the rocks at each other in what appears to be a game, but in the game itself, they're just there to ruin the player's day, actually standing next to each other and targeting Bilbo. I guess this makes sense as a way of making the stone giants a threat, but why didn't the developers just have the giants at least trying to throw the rocks at each other, with Bilbo having to dodge out of the way? This would just be more book accurate. Having said that, there is a nice bit of gameplay with Bilbo standing next to barriers and getting the giants to throw the rocks his way, breaking the barriers so he can traverse further. It feels like something Bilbo would indeed do, and as cliche as it is, much of the game is like this, really making you feel like Bilbo Baggins. For Christ's sake, I can't believe I'm saying this. Anyway, the rest of this level is just the usual mix of combat and platforming, until we get maybe 60% through and have the game's first major puzzle platform section, where we have to find a load of different gears to get a load of different mechanisms to work. If I'm remembering correctly, there are 5 gears for each mechanism, 4 of them being easy to find and one of them requiring some tricky platforming to get. I guess it's a test of the player's skill up to this point in the game, and there are extra platforms that are slightly harder that lead to chests. This is all fine, but honestly I felt it went on for way too long. The next level is Riddles in the Dark, and there's a lot going on in this level. There's a bit where Bilbo makes a deal with one of the goblin guards to let him through the gate, so long as Bilbo gets the guard the Walled Stone. In order to do this, Bilbo has to traverse the cave's intricate mining system, and so we have another platform section that goes on too long before we return with a Walled Stone. the guard opening the gate and immediately attacking Bilbo. Now, it does make sense within the universe Tolkien created for a goblin to do this, but at the same time this is annoying for the player, as the goblin could have just attacked us in the first place and had it over with. Following this, there's a bit where we free Balfour the dwarf from a goblin prison, which definitely wasn't in the book, although it's a nice little stealth section, and then it finally ends with a minecart ride. In the book, Bilbo makes his way through a tunnel. Not a mining system, a tunnel, and then plays a game of riddles with Gollum. This game of riddles only appears in the game as a cutscene. I do like that the developers flesh things out to highlight things weren't a walk in the park for Bilbo, but I'd argue this section shouldn't have been added to. In the book, right at the end of the riddle game, Gollum chases Bilbo and Bilbo escapes by using the ring to hide. This level could have been Bilbo doing this, serving as a good way to introduce the ring mechanic and making sense based on what's in the book, rather than fabricating an entire mining system out of nowhere. The cutscene that plays at the level's end skips a whole chapter of the book by quickly saying a pack of wargs attacks and the eagles saved Bilbo and the gang. I mean, yeah, this is what happened, but can't I play it? If we go with my idea of riddles being a stealth level of Bilbo escaping Gollum, the end of the level could have been Bilbo fighting the wargs, or adding in a boss warg to fight as a way of making both chapters have some semblance of gameplay. And then the game skips another chapter of the book, with the company not meeting Beron and staying with him and instead just heading straight into Mirkwood at the suggestion of the Eagles. To be honest, even I don't have a suggestion for making the meeting with Beron into gameplay, since the chapter is just spent with Gandalf recapping the story so far to Beron, but I'm kind of surprised this isn't covered in a cutscene. In the next level, Flies and Spiders, we finally get to use the ring, but it's not very useful in this level. In this part in the book, Bilbo uses the ring to prevent himself from being captured by spiders a second time, while he searches for and frees the dwarves, who have also been captured by the spiders. While in the game Bilbo does indeed free the dwarves, this is done in a section that involves a lot of platforming and combat, the spiders being annoying as they're small and nimble, making them hard to hit, and the brightly coloured ones can poison you, which is again annoying. More annoying though is the fact that this level takes about an hour and a half to complete, there being a hell of a lot of combat and platforming in the forest, before even more of the same in the spiders' caves, and then more still in the forest once more. A reminder that the game just introduced the ring, a major upgrade for the stealth mechanic, and then presents a level that has next to no stealth in it, despite the chapter in the book making it very clear Bilbo used stealth. And it wouldn't have been hard to adapt this into the level. Ah well, at least there's actual use of the ring in the next level. Barrels Out of Bond is a fun part of the book where Bilbo frees his companions from the prison of the Wood Elves by using the ring to sneak around, and escapes by hiding in wine barrels which are thrown in a river down to the inventively named Lake Town. The game does a great job faithfully recreating this chapter in the game, and as I mentioned, finally introduces the ring into the gameplay in a meaningful way. The ring makes Bilbo invisible, very useful for a burglar, but the game has a stipulation that it can only be worn for so long before it needs to be taken off and recharged. So there's a lot of quickly putting the ring on, running to an area where the elves won't see you, and then taking off the ring to recharge. Honestly, I think this is a great way of making the ring into a video game mechanic, although the reason for the ring needing to recharge isn't exactly explained and isn't book accurate, since Bilbo just wears it for as long as he likes in the book. Of course, it could be argued the developers knew the corrupting effects the ring has in the later Lord of the Rings books, and so added this in to make sure Bilbo would not be corrupted, but as I mentioned earlier, the same developers made the Fellowship of the Ring game a year earlier, and this same mechanic was in there, just it took longer to recharge. So really, it's a case of refining previous game mechanics. Also, Bastila reappears in this level to help Bilbo some more by telling him how to get into the cellars. While I could take or leave this edition, it's cool that the game's OCs make more than one appearance, actively helping Bilbo, although it does take away a little from the book's character development of Bilbo, going from being useless, to being useful but needing assistance, to being able to take care of things himself. Fair warning, I'm getting into spoiler territory now, so if you somehow don't know the 85-year-old story, switch off. The next level we have is a warm welcome. Not much really happens in this chapter of the book, the dwarves getting comfortable in the town before heading off to the final section of their adventure. So I was surprised to find that the developers dedicated a level and not just a cutscene to it. Bilbo heads into town and is tasked by Bard to find a local thief. This is something I really like, since in the book Bard is introduced very close to the end, and really it seems like Tolkien wrote himself into a corner I needed a Deus Ex Machina to get out of it. And so while introducing Bard earlier in the story doesn't entirely stop this from being a Deus Ex Machina, it at least makes it less obvious. Unfortunately, this is the level where the game's issue with being fetch quest after fetch quest becomes extremely apparent, since you're constantly going back and forth for people and stupid little errands. There are two puzzles towards the end of this level which are really annoying. The first of which involves making a path for Bilbo, and the second involves using the correct size barrel on the correct panel. In theory, neither of them are that hard, but because each has 3 stages, and because there is no break before the second puzzle, we're thrown right into it, the puzzles get really tedious really quick, and unfortunately, that's how this entire level felt as well. The story the devs put into this level was weird as well, since Bilbo uncovers a crime ring where humans and orcs have entered into an uneasy alliance in order to steal Bard's black arrow, an arrow that's been in Bard's family for generations. Now, I've done a small bit of archery in my time. I know that after being used for too long, even the most trusty of arrows is likely to bend, which renders it pretty much useless. So honestly, this is just nonsense, although book accurate nonsense. Disregarding that, Tolkien describes the orcs, in Lord of the Rings at least, as essentially nihilistic, hating everything. And while the orcs did form alliances with wicked men, the men in Lake Town seem more misguided than wicked. So again, nonsense. It's a good job inside information is a good level then. This is the chapter in the book where Bilbo finally comes into contact with Smaug, and he uses all his cunning and stealth to deal with the dragon. The level does a great job translating this into the game, Bilbo having to use the ring while platforming, avoiding the gold all around him and Smaug, as this will wake him up. If you fail, you get this fun animation of Smaug eating the Hobbit. Once Bilbo manages to bring back treasure for the dwarves, he heads back in, with Smaug on full alert, making things even more challenging on the stealth front. The cutscene that plays when Bilbo does this is a little weird, as he's meant to be wearing his ring while being right up in Smaug's face, but there is no visual indication that he's actually invisible, so it was very jarring for a moment. Bilbo ends up making Smaug furious, and so Bilbo has to run away while avoiding the breath of the dragon. According to YouTube comments, the music in this part is amazing, but my game glitched out and the music didn't play sadly. And things continued to glitch out as I got towards the end of the level, and despite putting this rock in the right place, the water levels would not rise, preventing me from getting to the end of the level and the rest of the game. Thankfully, this little thing called the internet exists, so I watched the rest of the game on there. KVG has very kindly allowed me to use footage of the game from their playthrough, and I'll link to them in the description below. Anyway, there's a cutscene where we see Smaug attack Lake Town before he's killed by Bard, which could have been exciting to actually play, but I've only played as Bilbo so far, so it would be weird to get a new character to play as this late in the game. The narrator informs us that the armies of men and elves are approaching Smaug's lair to make a claim for some of the treasure, and that the dwarves are getting ready to defend themselves. This keeps things short and glosses over the slightly more detailed politics of this part of the book, so we can get into the gameplay. Thorin tasked Bilbo with finding the Arkenstone, the true treasure he's been after all along. In the book, Bilbo has already found the Arkenstone. It was one of the first things he recovered from Smaug, and the fact that Thorin can't find it drives him insane. The game doesn't showcase this insanity sadly. So in the level itself, Bilbo first needs to open some doors by completing a matching puzzle, which of course mixes in platforming as well. Then there's some more puzzle platforming as Bilbo has to forge a new key for the treasury and use the forge. Yep, more fetch quest puzzle platforming. Obviously I'm not playing the game now, and full disclosure I skimmed through the footage for this level, but damn it looks tedious, so I'm glad I didn't have to play through it all. And now we're at the final level, the Clouds Burst. The narrator explains that Bilbo took the Arkenstone for himself and went to Bard and Thranduil? Oh god, I have no idea how to pronounce this. He goes to Bard and the other guy to give them the stone as a way of bargaining with Thorin and end the conflict before it begins. I'm very surprised that this part isn't a level, since Tolkien detailed how Bilbo snuck away from the dwarves and into the men and elves camp. So this could have been a fun stealth platform level, but nope. Unfortunately, Bilbo is unable to fully end the conflict as an army of goblins appears on the horizon, as the dwarves, men and elves enter into an alliance to take them on. This is the most combat focused level of the game, appearing to be a fairly linear, run a bit, kill some enemies, run a bit more, kill a bit more level. Bastila shows up and something kind of weird happens here. Bastila mentions Beron and how he's the only one who can defeat the goblin leader they're up against, and then awkwardly introduces Beron's character, a skin changer who can be a bear. It's weird they introduced this character so late in the game. I know this happens in the book, but they really could have just left him out, since it really doesn't add that much other than being the last thing in the game, but I guess it's nice he's here. Actually, looking at him, it's not nice he's here. Guys look worse than the bear from the Teletubbies. After a pseudo boss fight where we free Beron from captivity, Beron goes and kills Bolg, and that's it, the game's over. In the book, Bilbo gets hit on his head pretty early on in the battle and is conked out for the rest of it. So again, it's cool that the developers fleshed things out here and actually gave the main character something to do in the big climatic battle. Anyway, the Eagles come and join the battle, and once it's all over, Thorin dies full of regret and Bilbo goes home. All things considered, not a bad final level and ending. Just before I get to my concluding thoughts, I'll talk about a few non-gameplay points. First, the graphics are nice enough for the time, and the cartoony, almost Banjo-Kazooie-esque style works well, given that The Hobbit is a children's story. The PC version has better, more detailed textures than the console version, as was usual at the time, but even so, playing this on a PS2 emulator, it looks fairly good, all the characters being animated well, again in that cartoony style. On the subject of characters, I really like that there's a pretty diverse British cast of voice actors, there being English, Scottish and Welsh accents in here, although sadly I don't recall any Irish voices. Given the amount of Middle-earth Bilbo travels, it makes sense that there'd be characters with a wide range of accents, British or otherwise, so it's nice they added that detail in. Voice actor for Bilbo, Michael Beattie, is pretty good as well. You can tell the guy is enjoying his time and does a nice job of mixing the Took and Baggin side of the character that were prominently commented upon in the book. The music is good and suits the game well, setting the tone for many of the locations of the story, but personally I didn't think it was anything that remarkable. Clearly there are a lot of people who disagree with me, with the Game Audio Networks Guild awarding the game with Best Original Soundtrack Album in 2004. Maybe I'd have enjoyed the music more if it actually played, but unfortunately there were quite a few times where it seemed to get stuck or just not work, which appears to have been a big problem for KVG playing the PC version as well, their footage often having the audio cut out completely for moments at a time, although in fairness this might have been a capture problem. The Hobbit manages to bring a lot of the same charm Tolkien did to the books, and is probably the most faithful adaptation from page to pixel I've seen so far. However, the game suffers from being very clunky and far too reliant on tedious puzzles. As such, I would recommend the game, but only if you have a high tolerance for the jank that came with the 6th generation. And even then, you're probably going to enjoy the book more anyway. Thanks for watching until the end of the video. I have a friend who loves the Hobbit movies, and so I definitely didn't create this as a way of forcing him to watch my videos, and definitely didn't record this line to call him out. Definitely not.